look at the jump that you took from high school to college, what are some of the roughest points of transition?
Yeah, and so that was kind of our first foray into kind of non-homeschool world.
Right.
Like, I thought that school kids were weird, which was really scary at first. I was like, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to. And I think more so for me than for you was something that really bothered me.
There you go. Thank you very much.
I'm 13, 14. You're 11, 12. The homeschooling became a little bit more complex. Like, do you regret being homeschooled?
One of the biggest dangers of pulling a kid out of school to homeschool is...
Today, I'm sitting down with my sister Edie. She and I were both homeschooled from kindergarten through the end of high school. We're going to talk about the things that worked and the things that didn't. The ups, the downs, all the juicy stuff. We really get into it. If you're interested in hearing what it was really like to go homeschooled all the way from kindergarten through the end of high school, you're in for a treat. Like always, if you have any questions, please drop them down in the comments below. And now, a conversation with my sister. Let's start with elementary school. We had a lot of different groups that we were a part of.
Yes.
So I made a list here, and I'm just going to read through them real quick. We had science club, homeschool gym, we had a play group, literature club, writing workshops, we had First Lego League, we had Popeye's Pizza, we had Camp AIM, we had the WCRS radio show, we had the movies that we were making, and then on top of that, so those were all like groups that we had with other people.
Right.
We also were doing other academics outside of that setting.
We did so much. And I think that's one of the things that made especially elementary school homeschooling so fun was like no 2 days were the same.
Right.
You know, it would be like, we're going to this person's house to do science club this day, and then we're gonna go out to the park and do this thing, and then we're gonna have our big social group with homeschool gym, and we did homeschool art.
Homeschool art class. I missed that on
Homeschool
there.
art class. I did dance classes. Homeschool dance classes
You did that
on
garden
Thursdays.
project?
I did the homeschool. You did that with me, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. The homeschool gardening. That was in like middle school, I think.
Yeah, that was a little later.
I think like it's interesting thinking back to elementary school because I think I also have very kind of rose-colored lenses looking at it.
Right.
I remember though, despite all of our activities, there being a lot of free playtime. And unstructured playtime and playtime that was outside of the parents. Right.
And also outside of the house.
Yes. Very much outside of the house. I mean, I always say I grew up outdoors.
Yeah.
Right? Like, we would be going on adventures or just, like, playing in our backyard. And I think because of that and because it was unstructured and not without parental supervision.
Right.
The parents were in the house. They could look out the window and see us. But they weren't there with us.
Mm-mm.
They weren't monitoring us in, like, what we were saying, what games we were playing, all of that stuff. So we were like, we had to figure out as a group how to self-govern.
It was about an 8-year age span.
Right.
From about 6 years younger to about 2 years older than me. And you were sort of dead in the middle. They were about 4 years younger than you, 4 years older than you. So
I was the younger of the older kids and the oldest of the younger kids.
Yes.
Which, you know, I'm a middle child. I'm used to it. But I think, like, the negotiations of, like, okay, we've got, you know, there's only 3 of us today, so we have to play a different game. Maybe we're gonna, like, go pretend we're foraging in the woods and, like, make fake salads.
People say the word unschooling a lot. And I think we knew people, not necessarily in our close peer group, but we knew people that were more unschooled.
Right.
And I think my understanding of the unschooling philosophy is a lot more like, you're just going to read a bunch of books, you're going to just kind of exist in the world, and you're going to, by osmosis, absorb knowledge, and that's just going to be how your education works. I want to be clear that wasn't what our experience was at all. Like, there was very structured education time that was probably a lot fewer hours than someone who was in a more traditional school system would experience. And then there was also a lot of unstructured time, which is what we're talking about right now.
Right, exactly. And, like, I feel like throughout all of our homeschooling, it was very academic.
Operation over and stand back.
Yeah, we did know plenty of people that were unschoolers.
Yeah.
And that, you know, as a label is very much an umbrella term. There's a lot of different things that exist under that.
Yes.
I knew kids who did just play Minecraft all day, every day.
Yeah.
And then I also knew kids that were unschooled, but, you know, had a project that they were super excited about, that were spending all of their time learning about that and were, like, really learning a lot. And so, you know, it depends what unschooling is, but we were never unschooled.
No.
We were always homeschooled. Yeah, it definitely, though, there was a huge focus on the academic side of everything, but it didn't look the same as, like, a public school. Yeah, it wasn't like you sit down and you spend 3 hours on math, you know? It was like, okay, we need to get however many math lessons done by the end of the week.
Oh.
And there was a little more choice in some of that, I think. And, like, if I'm burnt out on math, okay, I'm going to switch over and read the book that I'm supposed to be reading and writing a little paragraph or essay about. There was also, like, so much informal learning that was happening.
Yes.
Like, I think a lot about, and it's still up in our kitchen, we have a huge map of the world that's just, like, on the wall.
Right, that's just the
table.
art above the kitchen table is a map of the world.
Right. But then the fun with that is oftentimes we'd be sitting there having breakfast, having lunch or whatever, and we'd, like, play games where it would be like, okay, I'm going to name a country, try and find it on the map as quickly as you can.
Yes. Or even it would just come up in conversation where it's like,
right.
Where is Paraguay?
Exactly. Right. And so, it wasn't like, you have to use this map to learn geography.
Yeah, right.
It was more like, the map is there,
yeah.
and it might come up in conversation, or we might play a game with it, or we might talk about it, but it's just there. Or you could just, like, stare at it for a while and learn from it, you know?
At one point, we designed a tree of life.
Yeah.
So this was a science club activity, and I don't even know if this is quite the same formula for the tree of life now, because
it's been changed.
Yeah, because at this point it was bacteria and then protists, and then on the one side you had plants, and on the other side you had animals, and then below that you had fungi. And that was the... Was that
how it was? I thought fungi was on the side with animals.
So no, animals and fungi are on one side.
Yeah.
Plants
and
are on the other, and then
yeah,
protists are in the middle, and then bacteria are below that.
Right.
I don't even know if that's accurate now, but regardless, that was up in our house on the wall probably for 4 or 5 years.
Maybe even more.
Yeah.
Exactly. Right. It was just there.
Yeah, I remember when Finian did a full blue whale.
Yeah.
We had this like big roll of paper, and he like painted a blue whale, and then he had to be like less than 8 or 9 years old.
Right. I want to say he was 6 or 7, maybe.
And then he like wrote, or maybe he had them dictated, but facts about a blue whale that were then taped up around this enormous. I mean, this thing had to be 10 feet long.
Right.
It's like enormous painted blue whale that he had up on the wall.
Going up our steps. So every time you walk up the steps, you'd just see the blue whale and all its facts.
Yes, and he could like give you a TED talk on a blue whale.
Oh, exactly. He could talk for 45 minutes about a blue whale.
Yeah, it was fantastic.
Right.
Yeah, and so I think a lot of our learning kind of came from that. Like, there were these things that we were doing, and we were sort of steeped in that environment.
Right.
What do you remember? Because I don't really remember feeling like, oh, I wish I was in school. Especially in the years, maybe let's say kindergarten through 5th grade, there was sort of an acceptance that like, yeah, this is just the way it is, and this is what we do, and that's just our life.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Like, I know I had a lot of that feeling in middle and high school of wanting to be in school.
Right.
But I don't think it was even really a concept to me.
Right.
You know, like my entire social life basically was other homeschooled kids. And you talked about homeschool gym and our Thursdays at the rec center. And like, that was my favorite day of the week. I loved Thursdays at the rec center. I had, a social group that I only saw then, and we had games. We'd play out on the playground, and we'd go in for gym, and then we'd be wandering the halls. And I think because of all of that, I didn't even think about it.
Right.
I was like, oh, this is just how life is.
Yeah.
And this is also how everyone around me is living. I don't think I had many school friends. Like, I thought that school kids were weird. I remember when we were kids, we'd make so many jokes about school kids. Yeah. About how weird school kids were, and, like, that homeschool kids were the cool ones.
Of course.
But, like, I remember that being a really big thing, that, like, oh, no, we're just homeschooled. That it was, like, an identity at that point. Like, oh, I'm just a homeschooled kid.
Right, but it also wasn't odd. It didn't feel like outside of the norm, because that was the world, that was the ocean that we were living in at that point, too.
Exactly, yeah. It was very normal, and just like, this is just what life is.
Yeah, and I think a critical component to that was finding other families that were homeschooling as well. Like, had we not had a community of other homeschool families, it would have been a very different experience.
Right, and I don't think it could have worked.
Yeah.
And I think currently there's, some people are moving to homeschooling, especially with kind of where our education system is at this moment.
Yeah.
And I think it's like, it can be a really amazing option. And I think especially for elementary school, I think it was really good for me. But the social component was a huge part of that. Like, I think that one of the biggest dangers of pulling a kid out of school to homeschool is if you're going to just have that kid alone in their room on a computer,
right,
doing all of their lessons virtually.
Yeah.
Then that can be so isolating.
Well, it's almost like the investment that's really required is for there to be a community of other people that you're doing it with.
Right. And also for parents to not burn out. Like, mom and dad didn't have to do everything.
No, they didn't.
If they didn't have, they don't have a lot of skills in science.
Right.
Okay, cool. These 3 other parents have incredible skills and incredible knowledge in science, and so they're happy to be the ones to teach that.
Yeah, just to go back to community. I think community was just so critical. People need to have some kind of community, especially if they're going to homeschool. That without that, we wouldn't have had such a positive experience. I mean, we just wouldn't have been able to do all that we did. Like, I think
right.
I've seen comments saying that we did it because we had lots of money. That's not true. But we did do it because we had lots of people that were willing to do these things. And we're excited about whatever it was, doing the pizza restaurant or starting the summer camps or, being a part of the movie project that I want to make at 9 years old. Like, there were lots of other people that were invested and interested and passionate about the thing as well.
Exactly, yeah. And they all had different skills that they were giving to this collective thing, right? Everyone's coming in with their perspective, with their skills, with their kids.
Yeah.
And so it's like you're getting a lot of, and a lot of them were very different people.
Yeah.
Very different families that were homeschooling in different ways too.
Mm-hmm.
We just had these overlaps from these classes that we did together. I felt like we had a lot of freedom. We had a lot, despite, our parents were very strict in many ways, and there were a lot of limitations on us. But there was the freedom to explore, to experiment in nature. Like, go climb a tree, go play a game and get your knees bloodied up. And how do I take risks, but also keep myself safe and others safe around me?
And when you say our parents were strict, you're meaning media consumption? Mm-hmm. They were very strict on that.
Yes.
There was some level of strictness about, who is coming over and whose house you're going over to.
Yeah, a lot of that, yeah.
I'm just trying to paint a picture of, what
I think,
what strict
also
meant.
Language was something that they were very strict about, that, how you speak to other people. I always thought it was kind of funny as a kid, but I kind of understand where they were coming from with a lot of it. Words like shut up or stupid or dumb were banned words in our house.
Yes.
You weren't allowed to use those words. And you weren't allowed to use put downs, right? Which was, mom and dad's attempt to get us to interact kindly. We found plenty of ways to subvert that and find other ways to politely fight with each other. Yeah, and media, they were very strict on and that kind of stuff. So...
But it was interesting because I feel like one of the things that I observed among my peers is that our parents had a philosophy that was something like very strict, and we're intending to set you on a path that we think is going to be successful for you, right? And so some of that is helping teach you the right things, putting you in opportunities where you can learn the right things. And there was a restriction in terms of what we want you to watch and what we're going to have you read or whatever, especially elementary, right? And then as you get older, that sort of opens up a little bit. But once I hit 18, those limits disappeared.
Gone.
Right? There was no keeping tabs. I don't think they understood that you could track someone's location on an iPhone until a year ago.
Right.
So there was no kind of constant observing, watching, continuing to parent after 18 unless you were asking for it. Mm-hmm. And what I observed among many of my peers is that it was the opposite, where they had a lot more freedoms when they were in high school or whatever. But as they got older, they're 18 years old or they're 19 or they're 20 and their mom is, telling them they can't go on this trip or they can't go and do this thing. Mm-hmm. And so it was a little bit more of just once you turn 18, just let you go into the world and go at it as you will to some degree.
And my mom, she said it a million times and I kind of appreciate it. She's like, you're an adult. You're welcome to share whatever you want to share with me, but if you don't want to share it with me, you don't need to. That's okay. I don't need to know.
Yeah, right.
Right? Like, there was this kind of intense shift from, I need to know where you are at all times, what you are doing, who you are interacting with, to then, okay, go make your own decisions, hope they're good ones, you know?
And there was an extraordinary amount of trust also that they would be good decisions. There was no thought that, like, or at least I didn't get the sense that it was like, I don't know, you know?
Right. Yeah. No, there was. And, like, it was definitely weird for me to go into college with that. It made for a very interesting first semester of college. But yeah, it was very interesting, and it's something that I really respect about their parenting. I think that strictness was something, and I think more so for me than for you, was something that really bothered me.
Sure.
As especially all my life, but especially as a teenager, I was like, I feel like my peers are getting to do whatever they want. I'm 17 and I'm not allowed to sleep over at my best friend's house.
Right.
Like, because they don't know their parents.
Right.
That's crazy. But, like, my friends are, you know, going out and they're doing all this crazy stuff, and I'm not allowed to. And that was really frustrating for me in high school. But then it was this wild, just, like, 180.
Yep.
You're in college, you call us once a week.
Yep.
We talk for an hour, we get the update, and then talk to you again next Sunday. Right.
Perfect. You know, I would love to touch on, because I think what people are interested in is, like, what worked and what didn't. You know what I mean? Like, and I think that's one of the things, like, we can elaborate all day about, like, this thing was great, but, like, what made it work or what made it not work?
Right.
And I think the area that I'm at least feeling is, like, community certainly made it work.
Right, 100%.
But once we were hitting middle school age, right? So let's say I'm 13, 14, you're 11, 12, in that area. I feel like the homeschooling became a little bit more complicated, and it became a little bit harder. And there's, like, the one piece of it, which is, there's just more learning you have to do at that age that's important, right? Like, you really got to know your math. You really have to, like, have a firm grasp on social studies. You really have to have a pretty good science background. But also, I think the social aspect became more critical.
Right. No, I think so. And especially, I mean, kids, as they're getting older, as they're starting to hit puberty, like, all of that changes. How you interact with other people, how you build community changes as you become a teenager.
Right.
And so I think that was something that, like, we had such a good community up until that point. We had such a strong, like, group of people that we were working with, and then that became much more difficult as, you know, more and more kids, either their parents were deciding, I don't have the skills or time or energy to be able to do the academic side anymore, so I'm going to put my kid in school. Or oftentimes the kids were like, I'm not getting the social learning that I want to be doing. I need to go to a public school to be able to do that. And I think that was something that became really difficult in that middle to high school range, which is why we started expanding outside of just the homeschool bubble.
Yeah, so that was, I think about us starting to do theater right at that point. So I guess I was 14 when we started.
Yeah, I was 12.
And you were 12. Started taking part in community theater.
Right, and I think we were the only homeschool kids in the group.
That's probably true, but they met after school in the evenings at a couple of different rec centers around the city.
Right, and we had friends that were already in that group that kind of invited us into it.
Yes, though it was sort of open to all ages and all people.
Right, I mean, there were adults in that group, there were very young children in that group, and then there were plenty of that middle school, high school age kids.
People that were, like, our direct peers.
Exactly.
Many of them.
Right. And that, I think, was a huge culture shock for me as well. I mean, that was my first interaction before I got to high school with my own peers.
Yeah, right.
You know, like, I was always the only kid that was in my grade homeschooling. We never had anyone else in my grade. We had 2 people in the grade under me, 1 in the grade above me, and then 1 or 2 in the grade that you were in.
Yeah.
And so, even though there were people around my age, there weren't people that were my exact peers.
Right.
And so, to go into this new social setting with these, you know, kind of they're theater kids, so they're quirky and they're dramatic and they're all of the things, but they are public school kids.
Right.
And they have done social life very differently than we have. And I remember for me in particular, that was incredibly exhilarating.
Yeah.
And I got very close with a lot of the people in that group.
Well, and particularly just the amount of time you would spend. So, like, when you do a theater project, and the way that ours worked is we did rehearsals 3 nights a week, every week, for 8 to 12 weeks.
Right.
And then you spend a whole week together getting ready for it. That's what they call Tech Week. And then you have 4 to 5 performances of the show that you've been working on. So the number of hours you end up spending together are both a lot of hours and also a lot of hours close together, which was not something we were experiencing with the homeschooling. Like, we might see people on every Thursday, but we weren't seeing people on every Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday.
Right, exactly. Except for oftentimes those kids in our immediate co-op.
Yes, and that was a much smaller group, though.
Right. And a group that we'd been around for basically our whole lives.
Right.
And so, yeah, it was a lot of time spent with other people, and also because of just theater and how it is, if you're not on stage, you're just kind of like off to the side doing your own thing with the other people, and so that led to a lot of open time for us to just socialize. And I remember the first play that we were in, I did a lot of like just observing, of like just sitting on the side quietly and being like, okay, how does this social interaction work? How are these kids interacting? How do I then allow myself to join in with them? Which was really scary at first. I was like, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to interact with these people. And I mean, there was even one point after the first show where I was like, I think I want to try a different theater group. Like, I really enjoy doing theater, but like I'm not connecting with people as much as I'd want to. Like, I don't feel like I fit in. And then we did another show and I got extremely close with everyone. I was, in a million group chats and we're talking all the time on Google Hangouts.
That was the other thing too, is that we would like, as a group, it was a very tight group. And so like we would hang out, we would do the actual rehearsal, and then all of us were like texting or messaging one another afterwards, and there was all sorts of like early teenage hormonal crushes and drama that was happening as well, and so it was like constant gossip material like all of the time.
Right, so much drama. I mean, theater kids are known for being it. As a self-proclaimed theater nerd, we are dramatic. Yeah, and it was very dramatic, and it was, all of the craziness, but it was like, for me at least, that was what I needed.
Yeah.
And that was what I wanted. I'd watched those crazy dramas of middle school play out in movies. I'd read about them in books, and I wanted it. And so then to finally be in a space where I'm allowed to be dramatic.
Right.
And where, it is messy. And there's all of these things.
And there's a lot of learning, and there's a lot of, like, people are stumbling, and they're acting in ways they probably shouldn't, but, that's also part of the learning of this space that you're in. Yeah.
And, like, even just, like, the silly crushes and all of that type of stuff, like, that's not an option, really, when you're with the same group of kids for your whole life and they're not the same age as you.
Right, 100%.
I'm like, that's not even a thing we're thinking about.
No, of course not.
That's just, like, my friend's little brother, and, like, that's just whoever's whatever.
Yeah.
We're just all kind of, like, whatever. And so that was something that I had been craving, and then was really, like, a good learning experience, I'll say, for me. It was really important for me to have that, to really, like, experiment with, like, what are the social, all of the connections that can happen and maybe should or shouldn't happen with all that. And then the fallout of drama.
Right, because, a lot of those relationships didn't end well.
No, they didn't.
It all became just, like, a chaotic mess. And,
right.
But it also was all fine, ultimately. Like, it wasn't end of the world. It was just like, okay, yeah, this is going to be a mess for a while. And
right. And then we have to, figure out how do we move on and how do we get back to a semblance of normal. But that was something that I think, like, was really important for my own personal development, was to be in a setting with my peers like that.
Yeah.
Where, again, it's kind of similar in many ways to the way that we played with other homeschool kids in elementary school, where we did have spaces that we weren't being observed by adults, where we were allowed to just experiment with social interaction. What does this look like? what is appropriate or not appropriate to say or act in this certain situation. And also the people that we were in were very, forgiving and wonderful and quirky humans that I never felt super judged by them.
Yeah.
I felt like I could just be myself, for better or for worse. And so that was kind of our first foray into kind of non-homeschool world.
Right.
And I think that's something that, had I not had that, there is a very, very good chance I would have gone to high school.
For sure.
Like, I needed to have some level of, normalcy in my middle school experience. And for middle school to kind of be hell for a while. Like, it was.
And I think that's part of the point, too.
Right, I wanted that.
Yeah, there's something about, you crave that, drama and, figuring out those social dynamics. And the only way to figure those out is to live through them and to get hurt and to pick yourself back up and to apologize to people or to figure things out, right? Like, that's all necessary kind of tension that has to exist to grow and to evolve as humans.
Right, absolutely. And I think kind of diverging in a very different way, but thinking about middle school still, like the academic side of it, you started to become a little more independent in middle school, but especially in high school. But because of our age difference, as soon as you started being more independent, I was like, oh no, I'm going to be independent too.
And when you're saying independent, what you're meaning is that our parents were not sitting down and doing a lesson with me. It was much more like, this is something, you're going to read this book, you're going to watch this video series, you're going to, do an analysis, you're going to write something. Like, it was much more like, we have something that you're going to work on and we're going to develop this together and then you're going to go out and do it on your own.
Right. And even more than that, there was, you have to get history, you have to get math, you have to get whatever. And then they kind of allowed me to make a lot of choices about that. And science again. So in middle school, I started watching the Crash Course from the Vlogbrothers, John and Hank Green. Still love those guys. They're amazing. I grew up on John Green's books. But I started watching their videos for history. I did their world history. I did their American history. I did biology and chemistry with them in middle school. And so that became, for me, a primary learning source. And because, they're very well trusted. They're giving you the correct information. It might be in a very entertaining way, but it is accurate information. And it is a pretty good overview of all those topics. And what's crazy is because I was the one making the choice to watch those, I learned so much.
Right.
And I remember, I'm sure I could find them if I look through old boxes, but I would take notes for every single video that I watched by them. And oftentimes I'd have a page, 2 pages, 4 pages of notes for a 12-minute video. Because I was like, oh my God, this is so cool, and it was entertaining, and I was choosing it, and so I was like, I'm excited to learn this stuff. I want to be showing and taking in this information, then being able to present it afterwards. And I think being able to have that freedom was really important for me, because I was starting to feel kind of closed in by the way that mom and dad were doing certain parts of their schooling. I felt like I didn't have choice in it. And so I was like, I need to have choice in this. I need to decide how I'm learning this. And then I learned a lot because of that.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that totally makes sense. Yeah, there was this kind of evolution, not just in how you were going to learn it, but in the way that you were going to approach it fundamentally, right? And so you going out and seeking those videos and saying, I'm going to watch these and this is how I'm going to learn world history.
Right.
Was, kind of you taking ownership of that to some degree too.
Right, and I think middle school, high school, I started, other than our kind of homeschool classes that we were doing, which we added media and literacy around that time. Then we were doing literature, writing, science club. We might have been doing some others. We started a online journal at one point.
A newspaper kind of thing.
Yeah, the Dragon's Journal. That was really cool. But other than those classes, I was in charge of a lot of my own learning. Right. So I stopped doing math with our dad. I started doing Khan Academy for my math, which also meant that I did a lot more stuff from online. Yeah. Which I think especially because of our parents and the way we were raised was a really big difference. We were not online at all.
Yeah,
But
it
also
was
just
a pretty
time.
low screen household, I would say.
Very low screen household, yeah. We had, like, the one old desktop, and that was, like, the computer.
Yes.
And so, yeah, I started doing more of that, which I think was good for me overall. But it was definitely a big shift from elementary school. But I think specifically my high school experience was nothing like yours.
Yeah, right.
That's where we kind of diverged. But that also being that a lot of kids went to high school.
Right.
And so there just weren't homeschoolers left. By the time that I got to high school, it was me and one other person. That's it.
Yeah.
So I did a lot of other extracurriculars and stuff while you focused on your films for most of high school.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Because you did what? You did cheer, you did track, you did soccer.
So I did, yeah, at the local community, no, not community. I did that too. At the local high school, I joined like all of their sports. So I started doing track my freshman year. I had a fellow homeschool friend who was a year older, had already done it. And so she invited me to join the team. And so I joined that my freshman year in the spring. And then the following fall, I tried out cheerleading, which was interesting with, you know, Mom and then our older sister Jasmine both being cheerleaders. They were like, yeah, you should do it. Go for it. It wasn't a good fit for me, but it was definitely an interesting experience. Then track again, and then I did soccer in the fall for my junior and senior year. But then I also had lots of other extracurriculars that I was doing. So with the high school, I did theater. I think I did 2 productions with them, which was really fun. And then, but I was a part of another theater troupe. I did ballroom dancing, which I don't remember if you were a part of that at all.
Yeah, I remember that. We were taking classes like out in Hilliard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that was, I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, that was cool.
I
feel like I've retained nothing from ballroom dancing, but I did like doing it.
Right. I don't know that I remember any of the steps, but I had a fun time. And then I also did, and you did a little bit of volunteering at the library.
Yeah.
Doing like the volunteer summer programs where you're just like signing people up for the summer reading challenge. And so I kind of followed in suit. You were doing that, and when I was, I think 12, I started. But then I got increasingly involved in the library. We were both on the teen advisory board at the local library.
Yes.
I think you were there for 1 or 2 years of
like
overlap,
that.
But I did that all the way through high school. I was like the senior most member by my senior year. I'd been there for 6 years or something volunteering in the library. So it was like, that was a really big thing for me. As well as I was on like the Franklin County Youth Council, which was a really amazing program that was like trying to get youth activists and youth advocates. And so we were like advocating for mental health stuff, and we were learning how do you interact with Congress members, how do you lobby as a grassroots kind of organization, how are you going to lobby for bills that are going to help that? And so that was a really awesome program. I wrote a mini grant with that and was able to like get funding to make these little like mental health resource cards.
And then somewhere in here, there's also a switch too, where I started taking classes at Columbus State.
Right.
Which is the local community college. And I did that for 2 years. I didn't take many classes. I think in total I probably took 5 or 6 classes over the course of 2 years.
Right.
Is that right?
Did you start your junior year?
I started junior year.
Okay.
It might have been 7 or 8 classes. But
sure.
In total, I didn't take that many classes there. But it was a great experience. It was a way for me to kind of get into a classroom a little bit more. Looking back, I think that those classrooms looked very different than a high school classroom would have at the time. But that's how I got my Spanish credit to be able to go to college. I took Spanish there. I also took like American history there, or American government there.
Yep, I took the same one. Yeah.
I took a film class there. I took a business class there. So I took a handful of classes at the community college level, which were provided by the state. Allows you to do that.
Right, and I started. So the following year, I only did 1 class my sophomore year. I was able to take a modern dance class through the community college as my first like official graded class that I'd ever taken in my life when I was, I guess I would have only been like 15 years old at that point.
Yeah.
And so that was like my first going into an actual class. And then I also was able to take, you know, government and intro to writing. And then I got really into American Sign Language. And so I took ASL 1, 2, and 3. I met my best friend there. I built a huge community around ASL, and those were classes that encouraged you and actually required you to go out into the community, to be interacting with the deaf community, to be interacting with ASL community, and all of that, which I think was really good for me.
When you look at the jump that you took from high school to college, what are some of the things that you noticed as being the roughest points of transition? Now, obviously, you started college in COVID, so that would add to it.
Yeah, that was definitely difficult. I think... Well, I'm going to go to the easier first, and then I'll think of the rough.
Go for it.
One of the things that I'm really grateful for... well, I guess this is both an easy and a rough, was the majority of my college classes I felt very prepared for. Having done the College Credit Plus for a number of years... And then also, like, I know you've mentioned, but I say this constantly, I never lost my love of learning. I never lost that through homeschooling because I didn't feel forced. It felt like I had choice, and it felt like I was focusing on things I was interested in. And so I felt like college classes were fun. I liked what I was learning. I got to do a Model UN and a diplomacy class, and that was so cool. And I loved it. I think going into the more difficult side of it, social life was weird. Right. It was very weird to figure out, how do I interact with other people? And, like, being an adult, and like we were talking about earlier, like, finally going from feeling very restricted to complete and utter freedom. Yeah. Was really weird. Yeah. And again, with, like, social interactions, there was this shared trauma that my friends had of being in school. Right. Of going through the public school system that I didn't share and I couldn't relate to. I think one of the things I'm grateful for is I at least had knowledge of that from my school friends from high school. But I do remember, I mean, I was very lucky. I met 2 girls that were on the same floor as me, and we were fast friends. And so they were a huge part of my support network for especially my freshman year. Because of the way that our homeschooling was, almost everyone in my community had known me basically my whole life. Right. Which is something that's really, really, really difficult. Because I changed from the time I was 12 to 18. And I felt like a completely different human. But my peers, my teachers, all of the people who had been around me my whole life couldn't quite see that. They were still seeing me as the person that I was when I was a kid, and that was something that was incredibly frustrating for me.
When you think back on it, do you have regrets? Like, do you regret being homeschooled? Is that something you think about at all?
No, not at all. I think I would have been a very different person. Yeah. Had I gone to public school. And I think that there are a lot of lessons that I didn't learn, some for the better and some for the worse, that most people have that I just didn't.
What are some examples of those?
Even just like texting culture or something, right? Something so silly as that. I learned and I did my own thing and I texted plenty of people in my life, but that wasn't something that was so deeply ingrained. And I wasn't doing it in the way that my peers were. And so I never learned how to do it in the way that other people are. You know, if that makes sense.
Sure.
And also because of the limitations that we had on all of that. Yeah. Yeah, those kind of little things like that I feel like I didn't get. I don't have any regrets. I'm glad that I was homeschooled. And I'm really glad that I went to the college that I did, I was not the only homeschooled person at all. I was one of many. Sure. And it's also funny because, like, I, in college, was very proud to be homeschooled. And that's something that I don't know that you had that same experience.
No, I don't think I did have that same experience. I mean, my school also, it's tough to talk about because we went to very different schools. We both went to small liberal arts colleges. Mine was very much more hoity-toity, sort of pseudo Ivy League, kind of wannabe East Coast vibe. Mm-hmm. And yours was a lot more like middle America, hippy-dippy, you know, kind of like earthworms and kale sort of vibe.
Right, exactly. Yeah, which are two very different vibes.
And at the school I was at, it just wasn't... I mean, there was one other homeschooled person that we were actually friends with that we kind of homeschooled together, and we both started in the same year. But there were very few other people that were homeschooled at my school.
I had a lot of people tell me, like, oh, you don't seem like you were homeschooled. And to be honest, I take that as an insult.
Yeah.
You know, like a lot of homeschooled people would be like, oh, thank God I don't seem like I'm homeschooled. I'm like, what do you mean I don't seem like I'm
right.
homeschooled?
Well, because
I'm homeschooled.
Yeah, I mean, it's a dig at, like, everyone else that they've interacted with who is homeschooled.
Right, and it's the perception of homeschooled kids as, like, not being able to socialize or not whatever. And I think I dealt with a lot of, like, lack of self-confidence in just, like, feeling isolated being homeschooled, feeling really isolated, feeling trapped in my own house, feeling like I wasn't experiencing the world in the way that my peers were. And I think that's something that's really hard for a lot of homeschooled kids, is like feeling that kind of isolation. But it's so important to put yourself out there and to be joining extracurricular groups with other homeschooled kids, sure, but also some without.
Yeah, and there are options. I mean, like, for instance, you were able to do sports at the local high school. We did theater at a rec, level theater group. I mean, the number of sports, too, that were at the rec level as well that were available.
Right, and there's youth groups, there's volunteering opportunities.
Volunteering, yeah, absolutely.
Volunteering was something that was huge for me in high school, in college, and beyond. And finding people that, like, share your passion, share the things that you are interested in.
What are the advantages you feel like you received through homeschooling that still affect you now?
The number one thing is passion.
Explain.
So we haven't talked about this a whole lot, but project-based learning. I was super into environmental justice was something that's been huge for me since, my whole life, but really since middle school. And that was something that I then got to dive deep into my interests, into my passions. I did a huge project on, zero waste living. And for it, I interviewed my grandma who grew up in the 1930s. And I talked a lot about plastic in it and about before plastic. And a friend of ours who's a homeschool mom who grew up in India, and she didn't use much plastic growing up, and talking about both of them. What does trash look like? What is the plastic uses? How does single-use stuff happen? How has it changed? What is your relationship with it now versus then? What can we learn from your child? It was so fun.
Yeah.
And I was excited about this project. And I got to put a lot of energy into it. I built my research skills through doing projects like this. I did another one on food waste, in which I was able to go to a conference at Ohio State University, and I was the only high schooler in the room, and go to all these panels and all these discussions that were so amazing, and I learned so much from them. But I was able to put a large percentage of my energy into my passion projects.
And throughout it too, there was just a feeling of we're gonna try things, and things might fail, they might work, they might not work, but we're just gonna go with it. And whether it was creating a pizza restaurant or doing the summer camps or whatever, everything that we were doing, there was sort of this sense of we'll give it a shot, we'll see how it goes, and whether it succeeds or whether it fails, there's gonna be learning that happens either way.
It's okay to fail. It's actually important to fail.
Yes.
As long as you are able to look back at that failure critically and be like, okay, what went well, what didn't, how can we do it different next time? And there was so much of that. With Popeye's Pizza is a great example of year after year we changed a lot.
Right.
And we were like, okay, we grew our own tomatoes, that was too much. We're going to glean them next time. We're going to find a local farm that has extras and we'll get them from them.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
And so being able to adjust and keep just building it that way. And also, if it's okay, we tried this and we're not really into it, we can set it aside and try something new.
Right. So I feel like to everyone out there, two relatively well-adjusted adults who were homeschooled until college.
Yeah.
Anything else that you feel like you want people to know? You feel like you want people to touch on?
I think homeschooling can be amazing. Overall, I had a really good experience with it. I think I learned a lot from it. It was really difficult too, though. Like, it's never going to be easy.
Right.
Homeschooling is difficult. It is very different than traditional schooling. But it also can give you so many opportunities. But, speaking to everyone and to, people who maybe are in traditional school, like, just because you're in traditional school doesn't mean you can't adopt some of these things.
Yes, absolutely.
Right? Like, the things that were most important to us are projects, our passions, and all of that. Like, those are things everyone has access to.
Yeah, trying things out. I mean, so much of the stuff
Right.
we did was over the summers anyway.
Exactly, right.
Creating a movie in your backyard or starting a summer camp or, any of the number of other things that we did are things that people could hypothetically do.
Right, exactly. And, like, you gotta be scrappy and you gotta be creative.
Yes.
But if you really want to be scrappy and creative, then you can really do so much. Right. There was no institution. Most people do school within an institution that does everything for them.
Yeah.
But there was no institution. There is no institution for homeschooling.
Mm-hmm.
You have to build your own community, which is going to be the pillars for everything.
And that's part of the scariest part, and it's also allows you to kind of customize things as you see fit. Like,
Right.
What are the kind of people you're looking to spend your time around, right?
Yeah.
And that's both an advantage and a challenge, for sure.
Right, I mean, community is hard. Community is really difficult, but it's also so important.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I feel good. This conversation.
All right, awesome.
Cool. Thank you, everybody, for watching. If you're new here, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe down below. And, as always, I'll see you guys next time. Bye, everybody.
Awesome.